Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed and on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 799. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about a UNESCO site that is also a U.S. national park and the first of U.S.'s parks to be protected as we go to Yosemite National Park in California. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Yosemite. I'd like to welcome back to the show Jill Robinson, travel writer from DangerJillRobinson.com. And Jill has come back to the show to talk to us about Yosemite. Jill, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
And Jill has been on before talking about the wine country in California and New Orleans, at least. Those are the two that I can come up with off the top of my head.
The only other one is San Francisco, which I talked to you about with Kimberly Lovato because we both wrote a book together, 100 Things to Do in San Francisco Before You Die.
Excellent. There's going to be a lot less pressure on this particular episode in terms of dimensions of death, one would hope.
Oh, I might mention it once.
I feel like this may be a silly question, but why should someone go to Yosemite?
Well, I think someone should go to Yosemite because, well, first of all, it's one of the most iconic national parks in the U.S. for very good reason. It's got about 1,200 square miles, and that's packed with huge granite walls, plenty of thundering waterfalls, domes and peaks carved by ancient glaciers and volcanoes. It's got kind of extreme elevation from about 1,800 feet at its lowest point and going to more than 13,000 feet at its highest. It's got more than 400 species of wildlife, from as small as insects and little rodents like marmots to black bears and Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep. That's my short answer. But I also think that it's really important because the framework for the park was established really early in 1864. And so it was really the first time in history that the Yosemite Grant Act, that land was designated for public use and preservation, which really sparked the idea of the national parks, even though Yosemite was not the first national park to be designated.
Right. The first of the national parks to be preserved, but not the first to be a national park, if I've got that correct.
You do. Yeah.
Excellent. And I didn't talk to you about your connection with Yosemite, but you grew up in California, as I recall.
Yeah, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So Yosemite, I've known from childhood and multiple visits in various ways.
Excellent. But we're going to focus first on the park, and then we'll do some side trips and things from there. But what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for Yosemite?
I think, this isn't a cop-out, but it really depends on what kind of outdoor experience you enjoy. And a lot of that's built around really how you're staying. Some people absolutely love camping, but they love car camping, or some people really love backpack camping, or some people absolutely hate regular camping, but they like glamping, or they'll stay in rustic structures, or they really want luxury. So to me, it really depends on how you interact with the outdoors. But really, like in terms of views from a beginner perspective, If you're entering on like State Route 41, which is at the absolute south part of the park at Mariposa Grove, essentially, and then driving into the park, the very first real beautiful opportunity shows up at Tunnel View, where just as you exit the darkness of the tunnel, you get some of the park's biggest icons like Half Dome and El Capitan and Bridal Veil Fall. If you're entering that way, that's just spectacular, and it'll make you kind of think how you want to investigate the rest of the park. But that's just such a small thing. I mean, people come in to the valley. People love the valley. Everybody loves the valley. That's why everybody goes to Yosemite Valley. But it's just absolutely full of jaw-dropping views.
Mm-hmm. And tourists.
Yes, and tourists. I mean, it gets a bad rap for being super crowded, and it absolutely is. But at the same time, the park is so large that, and even the valley itself is so big that you can find silence somewhere, even when you
Sure.
are in the valley and it is at the height of summer and everybody and their mother seems like they're there. There are so many ways to get on different paths and trails and really find quietude.
The only thing I would say about the park is in the summer it's going to be more crowded for sure.
Yeah.
And it's still worth going. It's still gorgeous. You do have to have a reservation these days. In fact, the reservations for this summer just opened up as we're recording this week in March. And so you have to reserve ahead of time these days if you want something in the summer. The only place you can't get quiet is in the campgrounds in the valley floor. Those are
Yeah.
a little more hustling and bustling, and you don't stay there for that quiet. There are campgrounds on the rim that are large and quiet and much colder because it's a lot higher up.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous park. And again, in the summer it's busy. In the wintertime, I have been in the Yosemite Falls parking lot with 3 other cars.
Yeah. For sure. And I don't mean to get off of the topic of what people should see and do because I have tons of info there, but I also want to add in, you're talking about the reservation system. They have a peak hour reservation system just to give more info about that. It's supposed to start May 20th, 2022, and it goes through the end of September, September 30th, 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just peak hours. So if you drive into the park between 6 and 4, you absolutely have to have a reservation to do that. And that's aside from the entrance fee. But there are ways around that. Obviously, go in earlier in the morning, come in later in the afternoon. That also avoids a lot of the crowds. But
Hmm.
if you enter the park through arranged tours, like, for example, if you're staying at the Tenaya Lodge and it's Adventure Cabins and Fish Camp and join their bus tour, and it's a small bus, it's not like a ginormous one, you don't have to make a reservation. So tour groups can go in without reservations because that's done through the concession.
Well, and one question I should ask, because I don't know the answer to it, is the reservation system just for the Yosemite Valley floor? Because that's the part that gets more
No,
crowded. It is for the whole park. Okay.
it is for the whole park because there are, when you go in through the entrances, there's not like a separate entrance to the valley floor. It is
Right.
through roads, but you don't have like a toll booth there like you do at the entrances to the park in general.
Right. Excellent. Well, let's get back. I derailed you, Jill, and I
No, it's
apologize.
okay.
What should we see? You talked about coming out of the tunnel.
Yes, that's one really great entrance for folks coming in from the south. Also around there, but before there, you're coming in through the Mariposa Grove of trees. It's near Wawona. It's an ancient cluster of giant sequoias, including a 3,000-year-old grizzly giant, or at least that's what the name that's been given to it. The valley, like I mentioned, and then also there are some out of the way places that I super love that aren't loved as heavily as the valley, which
Mm-hmm.
are Hetch Hetchy and Tuolumne Meadows.
Yep.
Hetch Hetchy is absolutely, that's up at the north part of the park, and that's way lesser visited than the valley. But the secret is starting to come out about Tuolumne Meadows. It used to be you just knew going up there you would find fewer people, but it's getting more visitors than in past years, but it's still mostly wilderness. And so a lot of people who want all the amenities on the valley floor aren't really going to spend a lot of time up at Tuolumne.
Okay.
Here's where I was going. I was going a little less by area and more by activity. So I was thinking,
Okay.
like, if we talk about hiking, there are some day hikes that kind of span different parts of the park. There's climbing or just watching climbers. There's star viewing, those types of things. So that's kind of how I mentally arranged my thoughts.
We will go with your arrangement here.
I like that. Okay, so let's talk about hiking.
Okay.
There's a huge list of hikes in Yosemite, and they're really varied for different skill levels. One of the easiest ones, and it's in the valley, it's the Mirror Lake Trail. It's also accessible and paved, and it leads to Mirror Lake, which is created by a swell in Tenaya Creek. Out and back, it's probably 2 miles. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, really relatively easy. And then in the valley, there's the Yosemite Falls Trail, which can be done in parts. It's only a 2 mile round trip, moderate hike to a spot called Columbia Rock. And there you can get views of the valley and Half Dome and Sentinel Rock. But if you really want to be hardcore about it, you can choose instead not to stop there, but to go all the way to the top of the falls. The entire hike is about a 7.2 mile round trip, but it's much more strenuous than going and stopping at Columbia and turning around.
Okay.
It is worth it though, but it's definitely steep on that second part after Columbia Rock.
Got it.
And then another one that I think really, I feel like it's underappreciated. It's called the Yosemite Valley Loop Trail. And it loops around the valley. You could do it in a half loop, but the full loop is about 12 miles. And it's funny because even in summer, even when there are cars on the road, you can be walking in the Valley Loop Trail and just still get nature sounds, still feel like you're separated from all the crowds. I did it most recently at the end of September last year when I was in the park with my husband for our anniversary.
And I'm wondering if this is the same trail that I did years ago. Probably the last time we did a show on this on Yosemite was 16 years ago or so as
Wow.
a bike trail. Is this the same trail that I'm thinking of?
Yeah, and I think so. It's challenging to talk about biking in the park. Technically,
Mm-hmm.
since it's a national park, really the only bike trails are paved roads and paved trails.
Okay.
I have seen in the past some information about the Yosemite Valley Loop Trail being kind of a bikey trail because, and that sounds weird, but it is kind of weird. There are parts of that trail that were originally paved for different reasons. It really was like an old Valley Loop Trail prior to all the ginormous infrastructure roads that are there now. And so
Mm-hmm.
you will run into little paved spots. But when I checked in September, I was told that it is not a bike trail.
Okay. Interesting. So you were doing trails.
Those are some varied hikes in the valley. Up north or eastish, Tuolumne Meadows is a good jump off point for an easy round trip hike through Lyell Canyon. Probably about 8 miles. It's really gorgeous in early summer when the meadows are super green and full of wildflowers. Lesser known hikes there, though, are Gaylor Lakes, which are about 2 miles, and Elizabeth Lake, which is just under 5 miles, and both of those are moderate hikes. The trails around Hetch Hetchy Reservoir are even less traveled. The most popular of them is the moderate trail along the shoreline to catch the spray from Wapama Falls and Tualula Falls. But there's just like, it's a crazy list of hikes in the valley and the surrounding park.
And I feel like we should do a little explanation of Tuolumne Meadows and Hetch Hetchy because growing up in California, it's easy for us to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about, but I'm pretty sure people don't necessarily. So Hetch Hetchy used to be a valley like the Yosemite Valley with waterfalls and magnificent cliffs and things, and it was such an interesting valley that they decided to turn it into a reservoir, and it's now San Francisco's water supply. And that's one of the reasons fewer people go there is that you're hiking around this reservoir and there's a dam there. And they've talked about ripping out the dam and letting it return. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. And then Tuolumne Meadows, we're talking about a high country area. So an area you can't go in the winter, it's closed. So it's a summer or spring to early fall activity.
Right. So Yosemite is one of the world's premier year-round climbing destinations.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely helped people understand that through all the recent hardcore climbing films that take place
Right.
there. But the main draws really for climbing are the valley and Tuolumne Meadows. I mean, if you're a hardcore climber, then in a way you already know the routes that you might want to hit. And Camp 4 in Yosemite Valley is known to be the climbers' campground. But
Okay.
beginners can also sign up for classes or guided adventures with the Yosemite Mountaineering School and Guide Service. They can learn to climb in Yosemite, which is kind of a neat thing to be able to say you did. But they have backcountry trips and also guided hikes if climbing's not your deal. But if you're intrigued by climbing, but you don't want to be hanging off the granite walls of Yosemite Valley, there's a really good spot where you can get a chair, lounge in El Capitan Meadow with a pair of
Right.
good binoculars, and you can just kind of get in on the action and enjoy it and watch and say, wow, that looks really hard. Where's my beer?
That sounds more like my speed. The one thing I wonder if you want to comment on that's somewhat in between, one of the more challenging and very, very popular hikes is Half Dome. And it's not a climb exactly, but it's a little more than a hike.
Yeah, it's one of those definite reservation system. You can't just go thinking that you're going to go climb
Mm-hmm.
Half Dome in a given day. You have to sign up. The signups go very quickly. I can't remember offhand how far in advance they open, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not extremely competitive, but it's definitely something that you want to plan for. The approach hike is moderate to strenuous, but then
Mm-hmm.
you get to the dome portion, which has ropes and
Mm-hmm.
cables, and it is extremely steep. People have fallen, people
Mm-hmm.
have gotten very exhausted, people have realized that they were in over their head, people haven't brought water. So it's something that if you really want to do it, you have to treat it seriously and look into all the
Right.
advice about it. But it's awesome to say you did if you've done it.
I have numerous friends who have done it, who enjoyed it. I have not. I think the window of opportunity for when I could have climbed Half Dome went away a while ago. So
Yeah, well, they always say this about adventurers, whether you're a hiker or climber or whatever, the most intelligent decision you can make is the one to say, yeah, I shouldn't be going.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call Semillon heure. Parfait. Semillon o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
excellent. Anything else in your hike list you wanted to talk about? Otherwise, we'll move on to your next category.
So, my next category is kind of water based. You
Okay.
might not think that you can do a lot of rafting or kayaking within the area of the park, but you can. The Merced
Mm-hmm.
River, the power of the Merced River really is kind of diluted as it gets along the valley floor. So it can at times be a nice little lazy river. There are
Mm-hmm.
places that you can swim in the river and take a dip. There are designated beaches where the Park Service has determined that within periods of time that it's safe to get in there. You can also enjoy a float. You can bring your own raft or rent one at one of the activity kiosks in Curry and Yosemite villages. Also, I think you can rent rafts at the Ahwahnee Hotel or Yosemite Valley Lodge as well.
Okay.
And then if you've got a kayak or you're renting a kayak from an outfitter outside the park, I think most of the lakes in the park, definitely not Hetch Hetchy, but I think most of the rest do open to paddlers as long as you have your personal flotation device with you.
Okay.
And then fishing, you can fish, wow, just about any body of water in Yosemite you can fish in. They've got non-native trout, among other species. Lakes are open to year-round fishing, but casting on streams and rivers is only allowed from probably around late April to about mid-November, and you do have to have a fishing license.
Okay.
And then one of the things I mentioned earlier about the reservation system and trying to avoid having to reserve by either coming in early or staying late. One of the benefits to staying late, if you're not sleeping in the park by camping or staying in one of the lodges, coming in late is a really great time, first of all, to avoid all the people, but also just spending some evening hours in the valley. It just gives you this feeling of like a big dark blanket being pulled over. And when
Hmm.
it's a clear night and you look up, you can see the universe. And it's not the only spot in the park. Of course, any lakeside or peak top spot will give you the same incredible show. But I think a lot of people are starting to pay more attention to nighttime in national parks, especially the ones where you have really great dark sky viewing.
Right. And I don't know if there are any ranger programs that there used to be when I was a kid that will help you find the constellations or things like that, but that would be something to check.
So the pandemic has kind of trashed ranger
Yeah.
programs, but they are slowly starting to come back. And really the best way to find out beforehand is through the NPS Yosemite site. They list
Hmm.
all the events and activities, or when you're in the park, certainly any of the ranger headquarters will have information. They have I think like a quarterly or biannual little schedule and newspaper that you can get when you get into the park to see what's going on.
Okay. I think that was fishing. Did you have another category?
I think my categories, I mean, there are a lot of categories, but I think that's a pretty solid stretch of opportunities.
Well, I think there's also sightseeing, and we have to talk waterfalls because that is something that people go to Yosemite for, should go to Yosemite for, and should know a few things like when to go. Any recommendations? Favorite waterfalls, hidden waterfalls, when to go and have the best experience.
I have never done this, but I know
Hmm.
I think it is late February, the firefall, which having the setting sun
Right.
illuminate. I can't remember which waterfall though.
I think it's Yosemite Falls, isn't it?
I think it might be Yosemite Falls. That is something that you really have to plan it right, and it may not happen when you're there because of weather, but
Right.
that's a big draw for a lot of people on an annual basis. I know that right now, I think it's Bridal Veil Fall, the parking lot around there and the access trail to Bridal Veil, it's being redone. So I don't
Oh,
know what the
okay.
schedule is for when that will open back up. And I know certainly you can still see Bridal Veil Fall. It's not like it's a feature in Disney that doesn't show up when it's closed. It's just you can't get close to it right now.
Okay.
There's also, I mean, Nevada Falls, Vernal Falls. Those are also other like really notorious valley waterfalls that people love.
Hmm. Well, and that's a pair of waterfalls that people can do. I sort of feel like the first one my grandmother could do, and the second one takes a little more effort.
Yeah. Well, Vernal Fall is the one that's closer to
The
a
parking
Happy
lot.
Isles area. Yeah, the
Yeah.
parking lot, exactly. Yeah, and then you have to go through Vernal to get to Nevada. Unless you're on
Hmm.
the John Muir Trail, which skips Vernal Falls, it actually cuts
Oh.
along the Merced River in Little Yosemite Valley, skirts Nevada Fall, goes around to Clark Point, skipping, getting close to Vernal, and then cuts back in a little bit and then goes down to the valley floor.
Okay.
One fall that people like to say is hidden, and I think it's just that you need to know to look there, especially if you're coming in on Glacier Point Road. It'll show up on your right hand side as you're entering towards Glacier Point is Illilouette Fall, and that's a big favorite of a lot of people.
Okay.
And then also as you're going towards Glacier Point on the left would be Sentinel Fall.
Right.
Not to get off of the falls for a second, but as I just mentioned, Glacier Point, which is a big
Yeah.
feature for people, the road to Glacier Point is closed through this year. It'll reopen in 2023, although not until probably late spring. And even then, it will probably be open only in windows of time at first.
From what point is it closed? Because isn't that this? There's the ski ridge, the ski area up there as well. So it's closed to there as well, or
It's closed. I don't know exactly the spot where they closed it,
okay.
but normally it's closed November to May.
Right. Sure.
Yeah, so when you're doing the winter stuff, you can still access through hiking. Same thing when it's closed now, or well, through the summer, the rest of 2022. You can still hike on trails around there and access, but the road itself for traffic is closed.
Hmm. And we're talking about one of the nicest view
Yep.
spots. So an easy spot for people who are not necessarily hikers to drive up and see a great view of the valley. So that's too bad. That might be a good reason not necessarily to plan your big Yosemite trip this year.
Yeah. And again, you can still access it
Mm-hmm.
through hiking trails, but you just can't
Right.
drive there.
Good to know. I mentioned when. So if I go in spring, I can see big waterfalls. If I go in winter, there are going to be fewer waterfalls and they're going to be a lot smaller.
Yeah. And some of them might have little frozen pieces.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's really, summer is wonderful. Spring and summer is full waterfalls, beautiful water, great greenery, blue skies most of the time. I mean, it's beautiful. But I really love fall and winter a lot too. Fall is great
Mm-hmm.
because the waterfalls are still going. They're just not gushing like they would be in spring, but you're
Right.
starting to get fewer people visiting in mid to late September, and
Especially midweek. Yeah.
tree colors change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful time. That's when I went most recently, was in the middle of the week in late September. I think they were still doing reservations. I think maybe the day after I was there, they stopped reservations, but it was
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And then winter is great because there are even fewer people and you just get an absolutely different look at the park.
You mentioned the hike out to Mirror Lake. And I remember, so I went up to the park one time on my birthday, to September. I've forgotten when my birthday is, December 14th. So you're hiking through snow and the park is empty. Yosemite Falls is blowing away in a stiff breeze. So there's not a lot of waters going. But I remember hiking out towards Mirror Lake and doing that hike in the winter and having that, I have this park to myself. I'm not seeing anyone else. And then, of course, I saw a mountain lion track and thought, I have this to myself. I'm not seeing anyone else.
Yeah, well, they see you before you see them.
It was the same emotion and yet somehow tinged differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. There are
I could have gotten
animals.
my tracks wrong anyway. Maybe it wasn't a mountain lion and that was my overactive imagination, but it is. I love the park in winter. I love the park in summer and I love the park in spring and fall also, but it's different.
It is different. And I think it's a nice goal. Of course, I've visited the park multiple times in multiple seasons, but it's a nice goal
Mm-hmm.
to be able to just see it in its different appearances every season.
Right. Excellent. If you're in Yosemite and you have a couple more days, what are you going to do?
Well, at least a day or two of those days could be going a short drive from the park's northern entrance at Tioga Pass. You can start with a visit to Mono Lake.
Mm-hmm.
It's got this really complex chemistry. So it creates these chalky stalagmite like towers of tufa that just stick up from its bed. It almost looks like, God, what do we call those? Like castles, something or other that you'd like dropped in water when we were kids and they were multicolored and then they,
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
okay, yeah, I can't remember what they're called. It makes me think of that. Although, of course, in Mono Lake, it's all really white and you don't have those crazy
Mm-hmm.
colors that come with grocery store stuff. But it's just really haunting any time of day. But the view, really at dusk or dawn, is just crazy and beautiful. But it's also
Mm-hmm.
just weirdly beautiful when the sky is super dark and the tufa towers stand out against the sky. And then from there, you would go south of Mono Lake for a drive along the June Lake Loop, which I really like in fall because it's got some quaking aspen about there that just are
Mm.
starting to turn yellow. But then there's also, I think it's a seasonal thing to visit Devil's Postpile. I feel like it's summer. Well, I know for sure that there's a seasonal shuttle in summer that you can get from the ski town of Mammoth Lakes to visit
Mm-hmm.
Devil's Postpile National Monument. And so it's got a stack of these perfectly geometric basalt columns, which
Right.
is one of the reminders that this area has had ancient volcanic history.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned Mammoth Lakes, a popular outdoor resort, both skiing and in the summer, mountain bikes and such in the same places.
Exactly. The only challenge is that if you're in Yosemite in the winter, you cannot go
Cannot
out
get
to
there.
Tioga Pass. It is
Right.
closed. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to combine, Yosemite and Mammoth in winter, unfortunately, you have to go around.
It's a long, long drive. Yeah, that
Right,
is not a
right.
combination that works very well. No, the other
No.
place that I would say out the east end of the park, and I love the suggestion of Mono Lake because even just telling people they need to get to Mono Lake means they have to drive all the way through that northern Tuolumne Meadows area, and it's just a beautiful drive. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous place that a lot of people don't see and should. But also,
Right.
one of my favorite state parks is Bodie, the ghost town, the old mining town just north of Mono Lake. 6 miles off a dirt path just north of Mono Lake, and a beautiful spot as a photographer. The old buildings there that are kept in a state of arrested decay is what they call it. So you still got the plates on the table as if someone were going to come to dinner, except that then there's a quarter inch of dust everywhere, or you still have the lessons out at the school. They're ready for the kids to take them. But it's a fascinating, wonderful state park that I really enjoy.
I agree with that. That's a really great place.
Anything you would combine on the west side of the park?
I would say yes. So if you're headed west on a highway, I think it's Highway 120, it's about an hour outside of the valley in Groveland, which is a really relaxed, historic town. I like stopping at Mountain Sage, which is a coffee shop that also doubles as an art gallery and a plant nursery, which is, of course, in towns like that, you have to combine random things. But there's also an opportunity to go rafting or other types of adventure trips through I think they're called the Eco Adventure Cooperative out in Groveland, and they do these great rafting opportunities for spots outside the park.
Okay. And now we start talking more whitewater rafting at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which is why you want a guiding group unless you do this regularly.
Right, right. The other place that I've been recently that I highly, highly recommend is the other entrance to the park. If you're not coming in through the south like Jill did, you can also come in through Groveland that you just mentioned, for instance, and then you're getting up to, say, Jamestown or Columbia, both of which are amazing places to stop in Tuolumne. I've got an article that I'll put a link to of things to do in Tuolumne County. But Jamestown has a historic train there and a place, the movie train where a lot of things have been filmed. The Train State Park, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, the Railtown 1897 State Park. And then Columbia State Park, State Historic Park, there is the remains of an old west town, basically a mining town that has been preserved, and great place if you're a history buff. And there's all sorts of other wonderful things in that area. There's apple farms and a couple wineries and some recreational lakes and things like that. So the Tuolumne County area is another wonderful spot to visit on the way in.
There's one other opportunity, but you really do need to have the time. So if you're trying to combine some national parks near the Yosemite Southern Gateway, so out through Wawona, if you can road trip, I think it's about 160 miles south to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks.
Right.
That also has some of the world's tallest trees, and you get even more High Sierra experience.
Well, and it has the world's biggest trees.
Sorry, biggest, not tallest.
Yeah,
You're right.
The tallest trees would be up in Redwood National Park, and these are among the tallest, but the tallest ones are up that way. But these are the largest, like the General Sherman and the General Grant tree are some of the largest living things. So they're pretty spectacular. The other thing that I haven't done, and I don't know if you've done it, down in between the parks, in between Sequoia and Kings Canyon and Yosemite, is the Sierra Vista Scenic Byway. So it's about 100-mile high country road that runs through the Sierras there with some amazing vistas. We've got an article on it on the website, but I have not personally done it, and it is on my list.
I have not done it either, so I'm no help there.
Excellent. What else can we tell people about heading up here to the Sierras? We're talking about an area that is in good traffic, 4 hours from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah, in good traffic, that's a fair assessment.
I think I have made it there even shorter in no traffic, but on a Friday afternoon is not when you're going to find, for instance, no traffic.
Right.
Add another hour or hour and a half.
Another thing for people to think, especially if you are flying, the closest airport is Fresno, Yosemite International Airport. And Amtrak and Greyhound also travel near-ish to the park, and then you can switch to the Yosemite Regional Transport System, which is called
Hmm.
YARTS. And they have year-round and seasonal routes. And in the valley, you'll see their buses. They have 2 free routes that cruise around Yosemite Valley as well.
Well, in the summer, if you want to get to the park from the east side, there's also an airport in Mammoth. But again, in the wintertime, that's a no
Right.
go.
Exactly. Do you want to hear about places to stay, things to eat,
Sure.
all that stuff? Or,
Absolutely.
okay. I mean, what I originally thought is that I feel like Yosemite is a place that you need to see in ways that work for you. So if you're a huge adventurer, or you're a camper, if you're a sightseer, all of those are completely possible to do in different ways in Yosemite. Getting a campsite in Yosemite is seems to be a little bit of a competitive sport, especially if you want to camp in the valley. Usually it is in a normal year. Out of the park's 13 campgrounds, roughly half are first come, first serve. I'm talking about
Hmm.
in the valley. But in this year, in 2022, reservations are required for all of them. And
Okay.
right now, 4 of those 13 are closed. So it's making it even more
Oh,
challenging to snag a spot in the valley.
wow. And that's 13 in the valley floor plus more on the rim and coming in. Or is that 13 total?
I think that's 13 total. Yeah.
Okay.
So 4 are
Got it.
closed. And usually people make reservations through recreation.gov. They release about a 30-day block of sites on the 15th of the month, probably early in the morning. I feel like it's around 7, my memory tells me, and you can reserve up to 5 months ahead of time.
Okay.
But if you want to sort of rough it, so say you don't want to play that game for the
Okay.
campgrounds, one great place to stay is Yosemite Valley's housekeeping camp. So they've
Hmm.
got these canvas and wood kind of rustic structures with communal shower facilities, and they're operated by an outside concessionaire. So, like housekeeping camp in the park's lodges book about 365 days in advance, but there's a 7-day cancellation policy. So things can open up at the last minute, which gives you a great
Oh.
opportunity to snag something.
Hmm. Okay. That is a trick I did not know.
Yeah. And then in the valley, the most affordable options are the cabins and motel in Curry Village, as
Right.
well as the Yosemite Valley Lodge. The big splurge, and if you can do it, it's worth it, is the Awani, which is a gorgeous craftsman style retreat it's on the National Register of Historic Places. But also the Wawona is a really great pick as well for a nice lodge in the park.
I have not spent the night in the Awani, and it is on my list. Somewhere I'd like to be able to afford to spend it at least.
I went most recently, which was a few years ago, staying at the Awani. I went for they do a holiday season chef's
I've
food,
heard of it.
like dinners,
Yeah.
and then they have like a wine pairings. I went for that and it was ridiculous in a good way.
Excellent.
And then you can stay outside the park. Your regular Airbnbs, those tend to be as competitive as the campsites. But outside the park, Fish Camp's Tenaya Lodge is great, especially with the Explorer cabins that I mentioned before, where you can go on tours into the valley without the reservation system on peak time. But the cool thing about the Explorer cabins that I like is they really let you feel like you've got your own comfortable cabin away from hotel life. And you can really walk straight into the wilderness and hit a hiking trail straight from your cabin.
Hmm. Okay.
Near Hetch Hetchy Valley, the Evergreen Lodge has rustic cabins, but they also have this really cool all-inclusive custom camping package where they set your gear up and provide it for you. So if you want to kind of get a camping feel, but you don't want to
Okay.
deal with the gear and you don't have it, they're a really great opportunity. In Mid Pines, there's Auto Camp Yosemite, which is a glamping experience. It has Airstreams and cabins and luxury tents. And then most recently for me, I stayed at the Chateau de Soro in Oakhurst, which is near the southern entrance. It's a boutique hotel that has a gourmet restaurant on property called the Elderberry House that people go just for the food, even if they're not staying at the Chateau de Soro.
Okay. Now, when you're out at Oakhurst, you're 45 minutes from the valley floor,
Yeah, it's
at
about 45
least?
minutes. And
Okay.
right now, or at least in September when I was there, some of that drive is a little sad because there was a fire that went through a
Right.
number of years ago. So you can
Hmm.
still really tell.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. So, dining. You mentioned a couple things there, like the Elderberry House. Anything else you want to mention in terms of dining?
Yeah, so in the park, my favorite, of course, is the Awani dining room. It's incredible food. I think they just got a new chef. It does mean leveling up your attire a little bit since there's a dress code. So, no shorts or t shirts or flip flops, which sometimes that's all I have when I'm there. So, then the Wawona dining room is just as much ambiance with a slightly less exclusive air. But getting a drink and sitting on the veranda of the Wawona is a really neat experience. But when you're looking at more casual food, it's pretty standard concessions operation with like pizza, sandwiches, grilled items. The base camp eatery at Yosemite Valley Lodge, it's a food court and it's recently undergone a change with more healthy options like falafel bowls and poke bowls and things like that.
Okay.
The Curry Village food and beverage space also has recently been renovated with new options. When you're in Tuolumne Meadows in the summer, they have a seasonal summertime grill for like a post hike burger and fries, or the lodge for a wider selection of food.
And is that at the visitor center in Tuolumne Meadows? I guess we didn't mention that there's two visitor centers, one in the Valley Floor and one in Tuolumne Meadows. Is that at the visitor center?
It is at the lodge, or at least the
Okay.
lodge, and then just outside there.
Got it.
So they have two options. They have the lodge, I can't remember what it's called, the lodge restaurant, and then they have the outdoor grill.
Okay. Got it.
And then outside the park, I did mention that one restaurant, but there are others that are closer. So, like if you're coming in the Tioga Pass entrance, which is the eastern entrance when it is open, there's a little town called Lee Vining
Hmm.
that is 30 minutes outside or so of the park entrance. And it's got a really cool deli called the Whoa Nelly Deli, and it's in a mobile gas station.
Okay.
But it's really worth like grabbing fish tacos for lunch and then just ordering a pizza to take in and eat later for dinner. Also, south of Wawona in Fish Camp, closer than where I was staying, they have the Fish Camp General Store. So you can grab groceries, outdoor gear, ginormous sandwiches. And then if we go to the town of El Portal, which is the southwest entrance, the town of El Portal has Parkside Pizza. And if you keep going farther from the park in Mid Pines, there's a restaurant called the Junebug Cafe, which is really good food. It's got breakfast, lunch, and their dinners are elevated comfort food, and a lot of it is sourced regionally.
Elevated comfort foods. So I'm picturing fancy grilled cheese, or what? What is elevated comfort food
Oh,
for
no,
you?
I mean, they've got steaks and they've got chicken and
Okay.
dumplings and things like that.
Okay. I didn't know how elevated or how comfortable we were
I,
talking about. Okay.
And then if you go even farther, is Mariposa, which is a larger town that's got tons of options, like a restaurant called the Little Shop of Ramen, which is a noodle place, and then the Sugar Pine Cafe is a pretty standard cafe. But park ranger, friend of mine, Shelton Johnson, has he says they're great for pie.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
That's plenty
Excellent.
of food, don't you think?
And that's plenty of food. Anything else we want to tell people before they head to one of the U.S.'s best national parks?
One thing that I have noticed in more recent years, when we visit wild places, we tend to see the signs that say wild animals and things like that. And most of us are smart about avoiding them. But
Hmm.
I think that it's really worth mentioning that the entire park really has black bears. And people want to get close to take pictures, which is not smart. And I'm not going to lecture that. But a lot of people like bringing food and leaving food out so that they can lure bears to get closer for the gram and things like that. And so the problem is with that is that then bears learn to associate people with food and they get closer. And then what happens is the bears get in trouble. They either get
Right.
hit by speeding cars in the park, or they start to get more rambunctious around people and around dumpsters, and then they either get relocated or shot. So I think that's something that I just notice a lot. I have seen people get really excited about getting close to animals that they shouldn't want to get close to.
Yeah, no. Once you're bringing food, you're doing all kinds of stupid there because it's not good for you and it's not good for the bear.
Yeah.
So, actually, we mentioned Mammoth Lakes and Mammoth. If you are interested in seeing bears, there's a fascinating program in Mammoth where they've learned to live alongside the bears. They learned that if they don't try and drive the bears out of town, if they basically manage the behavior of the bears so that they behave in a fashion that is considered acceptable, that those will keep the wild bears. These bears have become sort of habituated. And so I guess it's pretty standard in town to see kids lining up for the school bus and there's a bear walking by nearby and nobody paying any attention because they're just used to having bears in the area. The black bears, again, the black bear being the only bear now in the U.S. But fascinating program that is going on there in Mammoth Lakes.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually, I say it's going on. I was there 10 years ago or so with a Society of American Travel Writers program, so I don't know if it's still going on, but I hope that it is because it was a great program that was ahead of its time, I think. Jill Robinson, Danger Jill Robinson, if you were standing in the prettiest spot in Yosemite, where would you be standing and what would you be looking at?
That's a good question. I would definitely not have anyone there except for me.
Okay.
But I would say that one of my strongest memories really is up in the Cathedral Range or up kind of Tuolumne area and
Hmm.
being around Lake Tenaya.
Okay.
It's really closer to Olmsted Point on the way up to Tuolumne Meadows.
Okay.
The John Muir Trail goes near it, but not to it. And you do drive right past it on your way up to Tuolumne Meadows. But I just absolutely love Tenaya Lake. I think its name means something like sparkling rocks, or it's just the light on the granite and the water together just makes me completely happy.
It is a very beautiful area. Well, and that whole area is a lot of exposed granite mountains. Just very stunning. Very nice. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Yosemite.
Not to belabor the fact that in summer it is just jam packed. And there are times when you really have these kind of traffic jams stuck
Mm-hmm.
in the valley trying to get from place to place. And I know it's always going to happen if I go there in the summer. And yet it's always just one of those things where you shake your head and you're like, yep, everyone wants to come here in the summer and they know this is a problem and they're still willing to go through it just to see how beautiful this place is.
Right. Yeah. And if you had to summarize Yosemite in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Stops my heart
Ooh, excellent.
for me.
Okay.
That's my personal feeling about it.
Excellent. Well, and Jill, we mentioned Jill's website, which is really more a portfolio site. Jill writes predominantly for books and for magazines, but you can go to dangerjillrobinson.com to see some of her writing. Is there anything that we want to direct people at there that you've written about Yosemite, Jill?
The most recent piece, I did a couple of stories recently. One was talking about that Chateau de Seurat for travel and leisure. But also, I did something prior to the pandemic, or maybe it was during the absolute first couple of months of the pandemic, talking about Yosemite and my childhood going with my family for Alaska Beyond magazine. And unfortunately, that magazine is no longer.
While we're talking about your writing, though, what's your latest book that has come out?
Well, I am working on 3 books right now that are all supposed to come out in 2023. I'm actually kind of chained to my desk dealing with one of them. But the most recent book that I've done that came out was in 2019, which was the one with Kimberly Lovato, 100 Things to Do in San Francisco Before You Die.
Thanks. We'll put a link to that one again in the show notes. It's worth people taking a look for that. Jill Robinson, thanks so much for coming back on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for one of California's 2 national parks that is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Yosemite National Park.
Thanks for having me.
Special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially, and especially to those who hung out with me today during the monthly Zoom call. I do enjoy that. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler to learn more. This week I saw that in the Apple Podcast directory in Canada, Amateur Traveler was one of the top 4 podcasts, in travel that is, which is cool, but not that unusual. But I do wonder if it's related to the fact that they've been playing Amateur Traveler on Air Canada flights for the last couple months. That's pretty cool. If you're interested in coming with me to Turkey, there are still some slots available. Go to amateurtraveler.com/turkey2022. 2022, September 22 is when that trip is. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more.